It started as an ordinary morning at Buckingham Palace, until whispers erupted into shouts, and the entire royal household froze. What could possibly drive Queen Camilla to sob openly in front of the nation, stripped of her honors by none other than Princess Catherine? At first, the palace moved with its usual mechanical grace. Aides rushed down the corridors, clutching papers, adjusting uniforms, and exchanging clipped instructions. The marble halls echoed with the sounds of brisk footsteps and murmured schedules. But behind the polished calm, something unspoken electrified the air. Doors began slamming harder than usual. Courtiers exchanged furtive glances, their hands trembling as they reached for doorknobs. Then, an unexpected figure appeared, a figure no one had dared to anticipate that morning. Princess Catherine. She arrived unannounced, her car pulling up quietly yet decisively at the side entrance. Not a single member of staff had her on the official schedule for the day. That alone sent shockwaves through the inner circle. She walked through the palace corridors with a measured calm, her eyes fixed straight ahead, and every aide she passed fell into an uneasy silence. Her presence alone raised suspicion. Why was she here now, on this day, without a word of warning? Inside the king's private council room, Camilla sat surrounded by senior courtiers, already uneasy, her fingers tapping nervously against the table. She, too, had sensed something was coming. A leak to the press the night before had sparked a blaze of speculation, a whisper of a decisive blow to Queen Camilla's standing, set to be delivered within hours. Yet even Camilla, seasoned in palace intrigues, had not expected Catherine to appear in person. As the door swung open, Catherine stepped into the room. All conversation ceased. Camilla's eyes darted toward her, the corners of her mouth twitching, as if to form words that never came. Their history, those cold, cutting exchanges at state banquets, those quiet snubs on public walkabouts, flashed through everyone's minds at once. The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Catherine carried in her hands a sealed envelope, embossed with the royal crest, and laid it on the polished table in front of Camilla. Silence reigned for a heartbeat too long. Camilla, now visibly uneasy, reached for the envelope as if it were a snake about to strike. And then the first glimpse of tears happened. Camilla's hand trembled as she broke the seal, and the room watched in stunned silence as she began to read what Catherine had brought her. A quiet gasp escaped one of the aides. Another looked away, unable to meet either woman's gaze. Camilla's shoulders slumped ever so slightly, her eyes glistening, while Catherine stood motionless, her expression unreadable. Whatever those documents contained, it was enough to start unraveling a queen before their very eyes. But what was hidden within those documents was far more devastating than anyone dared imagine. An act of retribution years in the making. What did Catherine hand to Camilla that could strip away everything she fought for? The envelope contained truths buried for decades, and Catherine was ready to expose them all. The envelope, thick and heavy, sat like an unexploded bomb between them. It was no ordinary document. Courtiers who glimpsed it whispered later that it was a weapon wrapped in parchment, sealed with the royal crest as though to mask its venom in regal dignity. The silence in the room deepened as Camilla hesitated, her fingers hovering over the seal. Her hesitation was telling, as though she already knew that whatever lay inside would change everything. And then she broke it open. The sound of the wax seal cracking reverberated louder than any shout could have. For a moment, she simply stared at the first page, her eyes narrowing, her face paling. The words written there weren't just accusations, they were revelations. Immediately, questions shot through the minds of everyone present. Had King Charles himself approved this? Or, more dangerously, was this something kept even from him? Whispers had long circulated about Catherine's private conversations with the king, the subtle counsel she gave behind closed doors. And yet, these documents suggested a different story entirely. One of secrets harvested in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. Inside were damning allegations, records, and testimony outlining how Camilla had, for years, covertly influenced royal appointments to solidify her hold over the court. Names were named, dates meticulously noted. People who had mysteriously risen in rank suddenly made sense in light of these revelations. At every turn, Catherine's initiatives, her causes, and even her advisors appeared to have been quietly undermined by Camilla's invisible hand. But the most shocking blow was yet to come. Toward the middle of the stack lay a set of correspondences, written in Camilla's unmistakable script, lobbying senior royals to elevate her own grandchildren above Catherine's children in ceremonial precedence. She had reportedly described them as truer heirs, dismissing Catherine's children as a public relations experiment that would never endure the test of time. This revelation was not just treachery, it was personal, and it explained the flash of something deeper in Catherine's eyes as she stood over Camilla, a mix of sorrow, rage, and resolve. And then, as if the ghosts of the past demanded their due, another name surfaced: Diana. Scattered throughout the documents were mentions of Diana's memory being managed, her image subtly reshaped in public eyes to diminish her martyrdom and elevate Camilla's own narrative. The more Camilla read, the more her composure cracked. Her hands trembled visibly now, her breath uneven, the words on the page stripping away the armor she had worn for decades. An aide nearby, clearly shaken, later admitted to hearing Catherine whisper under her breath, just loud enough for Camilla to hear. It's time she faced the truth. It was not just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. Yet even as the envelope unraveled Camilla's secrets, the storm brewing between these two women had roots far deeper than any single document. The tension between Camilla and Catherine was no sudden eruption. It was a silent war simmering under the royal surface for years, finally exploding in that room. From their very first encounters, long before Catherine was a princess, the air between them had been laced with frost. When Catherine was still only William's shy and watchful companion at palace events, she would feel Camilla's eyes on her, measuring her, weighing her, and always finding her wanting. Insiders remembered the way Camilla's glances could cut a person down without a word. In private circles, she reportedly dismissed Catherine outright, sneering that she was too common for the blood and marble of royal life. Those words, though never spoken to Catherine's face, reached her ears soon enough. At first, Catherine bore the disdain with quiet grace, determined not to let it harden her. She thought perhaps, over time, she could win Camilla's respect, or at the very least, her tolerance. She dedicated herself to mastering royal protocol, to proving she could carry the weight of the crown's expectations. Yet at every turn, her progress was quietly, almost imperceptibly undermined. When she proposed initiatives aimed at modernizing the monarchy's image, those ideas somehow never made it to the final agenda. When she suggested patronages or charities close to her heart, they were dismissed as impractical or redundant. Those within the palace now confess what Catherine only came to realize much later. It was Camilla who stood in her way, always with a soft word here, a dismissive nod there. Camilla made sure Catherine's proposals were suffocated before they could take root. And each time Catherine was subtly excluded, each time she was made to feel she didn't belong, she kept her silence, waiting and watching. But it wasn't just a matter of status, it was a matter of memory. Diana's ghost haunted them both. For Catherine, Diana was a symbol of injustice, of a woman chewed up by the same institution she served, and she carried that empathy with her in every public appearance. But for Camilla, Diana's memory was a thorn, an obstacle to the narrative she wanted for herself, one that painted her as the rightful queen. Their very identities clashed, and that clash deepened every year, fed by whispers from staff and the sharp eyes of a public eager to take sides. So it was never a single argument, never a shouted confrontation, but 1,000 tiny wounds that festered beneath the surface until they became impossible to ignore. Each snub, each rumor, each calculated slight built toward that morning when Catherine finally decided to strike back. But what truly pushed Catherine to action was not merely a rivalry, it was a betrayal so intimate, it shattered the last threads of decorum. Behind Catherine's poised smile lay a heartbreak few could fathom until Camilla's calculated betrayal made it impossible to stay silent. What the world saw in Catherine was grace under pressure, the embodiment of duty. But what she endured behind closed doors revealed how far Camilla was willing to go to secure her own dynasty. Even if it meant cutting into Catherine where it hurt the most, her children. It began quietly, whispers of Camilla's interference in the delicate matter of titles and futures. As Catherine and William sought to confirm honors for their children, particularly Charlotte, subtle obstacles emerged. Meetings were postponed, letters unanswered, decisions delayed without explanation. Then came the chilling revelation. In a private conversation, overheard and later related to Catherine, Camilla reportedly confided to a friend, "Her children will never outrank mine." That single line struck Catherine like a thunderclap, shattering any illusions she had left about the Queen's intentions. Determined to uncover the truth, Catherine dug deeper, and soon discovered undeniable evidence Camilla had been lobbying the king, pressing him to withhold certain honors from Charlotte, ensuring her own grandchildren's prominence in the line of ceremony and visibility. To Catherine, this wasn't just palace politics. It was a deliberate act to erase her children's rightful place. And worse still, she realized this manipulation extended beyond Britain. During an international tour, she learned that Camilla had influenced foreign hosts to prioritize her own causes, leaving Catherine sidelined and humiliated in front of world leaders. Her closest advisors, seeing the emotional toll, urged her to let it go. "It's the way things have always been," one of them told her gently, but Catherine's resolve hardened. To her, this was no longer about titles or protocol. It was about respect, legacy, and justice for her children and for Diana, whose shadow still loomed large. Then came the final straw. One evening, as Catherine stood in the corridor of the palace, she heard Camilla's voice through an open door, laughing as she said to a confidant, "Diana would have never survived this court." The cruelty of the remark left Catherine visibly shaken. Her hands clenched at her sides as she walked away, her mind already set. That betrayal lit a fire in Catherine's heart, and she vowed to reclaim her dignity and the dignity of the monarchy by any means. Catherine's revenge wasn't loud. It was methodical, calculated, and stunning in its precision. Every move she made was a masterstroke, waiting to detonate. After the sting of betrayal settled into cold resolve, she chose not to confront Camilla outright. Instead, she slipped into the shadows, confiding in only a select circle of senior advisors, quietly gathering evidence and allies who shared her belief that the monarchy deserved better. Together, they began to piece together a case not just against Camilla's actions, but against her entire claim to influence. For months, Catherine poured herself into the work, scouring royal protocols and constitutional precedents, identifying every vulnerability Camilla had exposed through her own arrogance. Nothing escaped her scrutiny. She unearthed forgotten rules, obscure traditions, and subtle lines of authority that could be wielded like weapons if she was patient enough. Behind the scenes, she strengthened her alliances, ensuring that when the moment came, she would not stand alone. Those who had once dismissed her as meek now found themselves drawn into her orbit, compelled by the quiet power she was building. And while she moved with precision behind palace doors, the queen found herself subtly, almost imperceptibly, isolated. Conversations stopped when she entered the rooms. Invitations she once commanded began to dry up. Even the courtiers who had previously sung her praises began to avoid her, whispering about her behind gloved hands. Yet the outside world remained oblivious to the quiet shift of power. The media continued to paint the familiar portrait, Camilla smiling and steady, Catherine demure and radiant. No one suspected that beneath that gracious smile, Catherine's resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. In public, she played her part to perfection, masking her intentions so convincingly that even those closest to her believed she had made her peace. But those who looked closer might have noticed the faint glimmer of steel beneath her kindness. Every photograph, every handshake, every charitable appearance was simply another piece of her strategy, calculated to shield her true intentions until the day of reckoning arrived. And then it did. One quiet evening, when the palace was at its most unsuspecting, Catherine placed a single phone call to the king. It was not long, but it was decisive. With just a few measured words, she set in motion the confrontation that would shatter the fragile illusion of peace. As the hour of confrontation arrived, the palace braced itself for an unprecedented scene of royal justice. When Catherine finally spoke, the room fell silent. Every word she uttered cut through the centuries of royal tradition like a blade. It was not just the force of her voice, but the calm precision with which she delivered her words, as though she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. She stood tall before the assembled royals, her hands steady, her eyes locked on Camilla, and began to read aloud from the documents she had so carefully prepared. Every sentence carried the weight of years of quiet suffering turned into resolve. One by one, the charges spilled into the air, each more damning than the last. She named favoritism, meticulously citing instances where Camilla had manipulated appointments and decisions to favor her own circle, leaving others most painfully. Catherine's children pushed aside. She spoke of deliberate schemes to control the narrative surrounding Diana, of efforts to diminish her memory in order to solidify Camilla's own place as queen. She revealed the web of manipulation and deceit, her voice unwavering as Camilla's composure began to fracture. At first, Camilla simply stared, stunned, but as the accusations mounted, she began to shake her head, whispering denials that grew louder, then breaking entirely into sobs. At one point, she even stood, pleading for Catherine to stop, her words breaking into incoherence as she begged for mercy. But Catherine did not flinch. She remained stoic, her delivery steady, her resolve ironclad. The senior royals in the room, those who had once dismissed her as docile, now watched her in stunned silence, their faces betraying shock, admiration, and perhaps fear. When she reached the final page, Catherine laid down the papers with deliberate finality and delivered the verdict. Camilla's royal honors were to be formally revoked, effective immediately, and stripped from her in full view of her peers. There would be no ceremony, no dignity in the removal, only the truth laid bare for all to witness. Camilla collapsed back into her chair, her tears unstoppable now, as the weight of the judgment sank in. And then, in the quiet that followed, a single witness later swore they heard Catherine whisper under her breath, though just loud enough to be heard, "For my children, for the crown, for Diana." But even as Catherine stood victorious, what came next would shake her to the core and reveal the price of her triumph. Camilla may have lost her titles, but it was the tears, hers and Catherine's, that betrayed the devastating toll of this royal battle. As soon as Catherine's final words faded into silence, Camilla could no longer hold herself together. She fled the room in a swirl of anguish, collapsing into the arms of a trusted confidant just outside the door. Sobbing uncontrollably, she clung to her aide as though the very floor beneath her had vanished, her dignity now scattered like shards around her. Those who witnessed it described her as unrecognizable, a woman stripped not only of honors, but of the armor she had worn for decades. Her departure from Buckingham Palace was just as hollow. Staff later described her retreat to Clarence House as nothing short of tragic, calling her a defeated queen, her silence as heavy as her grief. Doors were shut quietly behind her, the echo of her weeping still haunting the corridors hours after she'd gone. And yet, even in her absence, the weight of what had just transpired refused to lift. Catherine, too, did not emerge unscathed. Moments after Camilla disappeared, she herself withdrew into a private chamber, shutting the door softly as the room full of royals and aides stood frozen. Inside, it is said she let herself feel what she could not show outside. For years, she had carried the burden of restraint, of silent endurance, and now, even in victory, her emotions surged, an irrepressible mix of sorrow, exhaustion, and quiet triumph. The tears of both women spoke to more than just a single confrontation. They were the culmination of years of pain, of whispered insults and suppressed anger, of wounds that had never fully healed. Their battle, though fought with words and protocol, had left scars deeper than anyone could see. In the stunned quiet that followed, a senior royal was heard murmuring, almost to themselves, "There are no winners in war." The phrase lingered in the air like smoke, unacknowledged yet impossible to forget. The palace itself seemed to absorb the tension, its halls eerily quiet, as the magnitude of what had unfolded began to sink in. No one dared speak too loudly. No one dared speculate yet what consequences would ripple out from this day. The monarchy had been shaken, perhaps irrevocably, but the silence seemed to ask a darker question. Had Catherine's decisive blow truly ended Camilla's reign, or had it just begun a darker chapter? With Camilla dethroned and Catherine triumphant, the monarchy stood on the edge of an abyss. Was this the dawn of a new era, or the beginning of chaos? The palace gates had barely closed on that unforgettable confrontation when the outside world descended like a storm. Newspapers blazed with headlines, calling it the most ruthless act ever seen within royal walls. Photos of Catherine, unflinching as Camilla fled in tears, splashed across front pages, each editor crafting their own narrative of what had unfolded. Public opinion was immediate and ferocious. Some hailed Catherine as a heroine, the woman who finally stood up for the integrity of the monarchy and dared to say what no one else would. She was called courageous, regal, and fiercely loyal to both her children and the crown. But others saw only cruelty in her actions. They called her merciless, a woman who had humiliated her predecessor with surgical precision, tearing apart a fragile institution already under scrutiny. That split in perception sent shockwaves through the royal family, forcing them into damage control before the world could make up its mind entirely. Meanwhile, Camilla vanished from public view entirely. For weeks, she was not seen in public, retreating behind the walls of Clarence House. Reports filtered out, some claiming she was bedridden with grief, others suggesting she was consulting legal counsel to defend what little dignity she still had. Whispers about her health, about her future, about whether she would ever be seen at court again each day, brought a fresh flurry of speculation that only deepened the drama. At the center of it all stood the king, trapped between his wife and his heir. Those close to him said he was visibly aged by the ordeal, his loyalty to Camilla wavering under the relentless weight of Catherine's evidence, yet unable to fully abandon the woman he had defended for decades. His silence only fed the fire, leaving aides scrambling to craft statements that satisfied no one and settled nothing. Inside the palace, efforts to manage the fallout intensified. Courtiers worked day and night to salvage alliances with foreign dignitaries and calm the growing unease among the Commonwealth. Every move Catherine made was dissected, every absence by Camilla interpreted as a signal. And yet, beneath the surface, darker whispers began to circulate. Rumors hinted that Camilla was not finished, that from the shadows, she was quietly plotting her own revenge, gathering her loyalists for a return no one would see coming. And just when it seemed the drama had peaked, a final revelation arrived, one that threatened to upend everything once again. In the aftermath of tears and titles stripped, a final revelation emerged, a truth so dark it cast a shadow over everything Catherine and Camilla fought for. Just as the palace began to exhale, believing the battle had reached its brutal end, an anonymous source came forward with shocking claims. According to this insider, the feud between the two women was not entirely theirs to own. Behind the scenes, another figure more cunning and ambitious than either had been pulling the strings all along, sowing mistrust and fueling conflict to serve their own hidden agenda. Hints pointed to a senior royal whose name had never been uttered during the confrontation, someone who stood to benefit from the chaos Catherine and Camilla created. Whispers suggested this shadowy presence had fed both sides with misinformation, ensuring that every wound cut deeper and every word struck harder, all while remaining unseen. And in the cold light of day, a cruel realization began to take shape that Catherine's carefully plotted actions may have played directly into this hidden figure's hands, serving a scheme far larger than she had imagined. Camilla, before leaving the palace for what many believed would be the final time, was said to have leaned toward Catherine and whispered just loud enough to be heard, "You think you've won?" The words lingered in the silence that followed, unsettling even those who had stood firmly at Catherine's side. That night, aides reported seeing Catherine pacing her private quarters, unable to rest, her mind spinning with doubt, as though the certainty of her triumph had already begun to crack. By morning, it was clear the monarchy was not restored, but teetering on the brink of yet another scandal, with both women's futures uncertain, and the family more fractured than ever. And so the palace doors close once more, but the echoes of that day of tears, betrayal, and stripped honors will haunt the monarchy forever. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.